welcome back to the Flatten Your Fear Summit. This is an exciting series about getting past your fears, getting past those things that hold you back so you can find out what your purpose is and walk in it. And today I am honored to have with us on this show, Catholic evangelist, radio host, author, speaker, Gary Zimak. Gary, welcome to the summit.
Hey, Elizabeth, thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Well, it's exciting. And when I was looking for speakers, I went to your information. And I'm like, wait a minute. Somebody told me to look. I said, who is this Gary Zimak guy? Every next word, every other word was anxiety, fear, worry. I'm like, all right, I got to get this guy on the show because clearly he has a message very, very pointed towards all of this. So I want this to be an opportunity for someone to get something out of this today that will help them move forward in life. And I know you have so much wisdom, so much to share. So let's get to it so that people can gain all of that. So Gary, you don't just wake up one day and do what you're doing, right? So if it were that easy. So tell us, what was the path like for you to finally reach, your purpose and doing all that you're doing now? Give us some insight into that.
It was a long journey, Elizabeth, let me tell you. But in terms of my career as a worrier, how about if we start with that?
Wow.
I go back to when I was about 5 or 6 years old. I was one of those guys who was anxious. As a kid, I was anxious that my parents would die. I was anxious that I had a fatal disease. And, I'd read a book about somebody, a historical figure. I remember Teddy Roosevelt, I think, had tuberculosis. And I'm in school reading about him. And I thought, wait a minute, I can't breathe. I'm having trouble breathing. I bet I have that. And for some reason, I'm one of those guys that tends to be wired toward anxiety. So It goes back to when I was very young, was always anxious from the time I was a child. And I still, to this day, have that tendency. I have a tendency to be anxious. I can look at any situation and always imagine the worst.
Wow.
And that's my nature.
Yeah.
But the Lord has blessed me, and I'm able to be at peace now with His help. But my story in terms of my faith, I go back to the fact I was baptized into the Catholic faith when I was a baby. Went to Mass every week. My parents took me to church. I never ever missed going to church, but yet I didn't have, I would say, a strong faith. I went to Catholic school. I had all of the ingredients. I should have had all the ingredients to be able to connect with the Lord, but it just never happened for me. So I was anxious for most of my life. Eventually, as I got older, it developed into panic attacks. At least I think about 5 times I was in the ER thinking I was having a heart attack. When I was in my 20s, I wasn't even that old at the time. And it just progressed from there. Stomach issues, you name it. I had heart palpitations. I had it all. And I'm just one of those guys who has this tendency to be a worrier. And one day, through oddly enough, what I considered a medical crisis, I thought I was dying, because that's what those of us who are hypochondriacs do. We diagnose ourselves, we get some strange symptoms, and we say we're dying. Through that crisis, I had an encounter with Jesus Christ, and he turned my life around. Wow. And I went from working as a software developer to going into full-time ministry, writing, speaking, with no background, no training in journalism or radio or television. But as they say, when God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. So I feel this is my goal.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? I want to go back a little bit to your youth. This anxiety, a lot of people have this. A lot of people right now listening are saying, oh my gosh, I can relate to that. What have you discovered in terms of, do you feel like you inherited a tendency towards that? Do you feel that it was your environment? Have you ever kind of gotten to the point where you've recognized or figured out why you were so anxious?
I've thought about it a lot. I had a great childhood. I had wonderful parents who took care of me. I never doubted that I was loved. I would say, if anything, when I try to think back and really pick this apart and say, well, when did I start becoming such a worrier? Yeah. I remember in first grade, one of my classmates' fathers died suddenly. And that was really hard for me, because then I started thinking, what happens if my dad dies? Wow. And I remember that seed being planted. My mother, I'm of Polish heritage, 100% Polish. And my mother my parents are first generation Americans. So my mother was very superstitious, and it was, I don't know if it's a Polish thing. I talked to some people said, yeah, maybe. There was always that tendency for her to go to the negative.
Right.
A bird flew in the house. Oh, that means somebody's going to die.
Right.
She had a dream book, and
yeah,
you had a dream, but every dream interpretation was negative. There were no positive ones. So I don't know. I think it's possibly my upbringing, but in terms of a childhood, I had a great childhood. I mean, no real problems, no health issues. My parents were healthy.
That's not always an indication, is it? It's interesting when you talk to people who have dealt with it. Although I find it's kind of pointed what you said about your mom, and it doesn't mean she wasn't a great mom, but she had that superstition, and that can cause fear. I remember, Gary, my 104-year-old grandmother, that's how long she lived, saying to me, "Stop worrying." She said, 99% of what I worried about never happened.
Yeah.
And I got the feeling that sometimes this nature and tendency can be handed down. But you did mention something also very interesting, which is a seed being planted and having a moment of stress. A young child, you're 6 years old in first grade, I think that's right, and approximately, and your friend's father dies, and you can't really figure out how to not let that create fear in you. So it's interesting. We can look back and see if we can identify where those seeds were planted, and then grew from that, this whole thing that you struggle with. So you don't really break free until your 20s?
Longer than that. I throughout my 20s, it's funny, the anxiety, the type of anxiety just changed. It was a different things I worried about through the years, but health was a primary one for me. So, as I grew older, when I was in college, and even when I graduated college, that's really when the panic attacks started.
Wow.
And it started with a feeling in my heart, a flutter, a missed beat, or something like that. And I had it in my head that I had a heart condition, but I didn't. And then that would lead, it would just be this spiral downward that would start once with that. I'd feel a flutter and I'd say, oh, this is it, I'm having a heart attack. And it would just go, and it would escalate to the point where I would have to get somebody to take me to the emergency room.
Wow.
So yeah, that went through my 20s. And then it died down a little bit. I was on medication for a brief time. Didn't do me much good. It was just making me apathetic. It wasn't the right thing for me, and I realized there was a bigger problem. But what's funny, Elizabeth? For some reason, going to church every week, going to Catholic school, all this God talk, I never made the connection that Jesus would constantly say to not be afraid, to do not worry. I mean, the answer was right in front of me, but we were traditional Catholics.
Yeah.
And growing up, nobody really talked about Jesus or the Bible outside of church or school. We just didn't do that.
Yeah.
So it was an intellectual faith more than in the heart.
More than the personal, I even look at, as an evangelical, I look at my kids and I'm saying to them, you have to move from your parents' faith to your personal faith. And at what age does that happen? But I do recognize as well that within the Catholic traditions, more so, in the older days, and I think it's changing, you yourself call yourself a Catholic, evangelist, which is two beautiful words together. But, it wasn't like, hey, take this Bible, read it. Hey, this is a personal guy, this figure, he wants to have a friendship with you. And that concept, it wasn't preached or taught, so it didn't take hold. And that really makes a difference, doesn't it?
It does. And I had limited exposure. I remember when I was, again, in my college years, I had a friend who took me to a charismatic prayer meeting. Because at that time, there was a Pentecostal movement really taking root in the Catholic Church. So he took me to this Catholic charismatic prayer meeting, and I said, whoa, these people are really weird. This is not what we do as Catholics, but here's the thing. A seed was planted. I said, wait a minute, these people are happy. They're talking about Jesus. They got Bibles. They're not afraid. They believe in miracles. And, that initial feeling of, wow, this is weird. Because I'm an introvert, basically. And it's just a little strange for me, all this goings on, but I liked it. And I kept going back, and my friend and I went for the better part of a year, and that planted, and some seeds were planted there. And I think that really led to that, what you talk about, that encounter with Jesus as a real person. It's like, whoa, this guy's real. He can help me.
Yeah, it makes all the difference, and he has all the answers. So, so as you started to develop that friendship and that relationship, this is where now are you actually seeing tools? Is he giving you tools to deal with your anxiety, or is it more like that peace that overcame you? You just didn't have the attacks. What was that like for you? How did you finally start to deal with that fear and worry that had been a part of you for so long?
Boy, you know what? And I look at this, it was such a process. I wish I could say that all of a sudden the light bulb went off and me and Jesus, we were best buddies, no more worrying. But it was such a process. And I saw, though, for, like you said, for the first time that, wait a minute, maybe he can bring me peace. And I'd go to these prayer meetings, and I was feeling the peace, and I was letting the Holy Spirit work through me, and all was well. But eventually I graduated from college, and it was a really bad job market at the time, and I struggled to get work, and I let the world just overtake me, and I started just lapsing again. But there were some important seeds planted that would eventually bear fruit many years later. And after that, it was an ongoing process. I thought I was never going to get married. I was single. I'd never meet a woman. I'd never get married. And when I was 35, I met my wonderful wife, Eileen. We got married. But then we struggled with some other things. We had infertility issues. Then we had premature children. We have twin daughters. They're 22 years old now. They were given a 10% chance of being born alive.
Wow.
So first infertility, then we're pregnant with twins, and then, oh, your kids are going to die. So, it was like one thing after another. Then when they were born, they're 3 months premature. We're dealing with that. And I'm still reeling. I'm praying at times in desperation, but I wouldn't say my relationship with the Lord was that good at that point. So I was still a nervous wreck,
Yeah.
So
You didn't have the peace at that point that you should have had.
No, but I was learning along the way. This process was taking effect, and eventually I could say I put it all together. But it was. I remember this. It was late 2004. I had this mystery ailment. And again, I concluded, well, I'm dying. That's all there is to it. My wife finally said, why don't you go to the doctor? And I said, no, I can't do that because he might find something. This is what hypochondriacs do. Right? I'll just worry about it, but at least I don't have it. So, but of course, they found some possible symptoms. And this went on for about 6 months with a series of tests. And what they pretty much told me is, well, it could be a virus or it could be cancer, but we have to watch it.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
In the midst of that, I started, finally reconnecting with my Catholic faith for real, going to daily mass, reading the Bible, listening to Catholic radio, watching Catholic TV shows. All of a sudden I was, okay, Jesus, I'm going to meet you soon for real when I die, so I better get to know you. But what happened is I started to feel this incredible peace. And then I realized, I'm finally getting to know him. I made the decision to never turn back at that point.
Yeah.
I want to point out, I'm working as a software developer at the time.
Still at that point.
30 years.
Oh, wow.
And then all of a sudden I get the idea, well, I think God's calling me to be a full-time Catholic speaker and author with no credentials.
You said you were an introvert. How does an introvert?
Isn't that wacky? But that's the power of the Holy Spirit, I think. Because I love to speak in public. I get fired up when I do radio and TV. No background in it, no background in journalism, but yet I feel this desire to do it. It was 3 long years working in the software industry after that. I mean, overall, it was 30 years, but the last 3 years were brutal because I didn't want to be there anymore. I hated my job. And then eventually, oddly enough, in 2012, January the 6th, 2012, God answered my prayer. My wife and I were praying in a very unusual way. I got laid off. Got laid off, and my wife said, you might never get this chance again. Why don't you go for it? Wow. And it's been incredible. It's been an incredible 8 years now of full-time ministry, and the Lord's providing.
Yeah, he does that. He does that. And this is, why I wanted you to share is because I see so strongly that you found your purpose, but that is a winding road and it's never a straight line. I look at the books that you've written and you clearly are going back to address the younger you, right? And address this fear and anxiety. And what's interesting is I think we can have that peace, but we, for some reason, it's free to all of us at any moment,
Yeah.
but it's a submission. Like we don't want to submit to it or something. We don't have the knowledge. We don't have to go through what we go through. But having said that, our enemy knows our weaknesses, right?
Yeah.
And resistance and our enemy will come to say, well, you know what, Gary, that pain you're feeling in your chest, no, you're already set free of all of this. But, this isn't a place where we don't recognize that we can once again get in that battle. So when you start now where you are, when you start to have fear or worry, anxiety, what do you do right away? What is your reaction to it?
My reaction is to turn to the Lord in prayer and say, Lord, I'm going to focus on you. You can do all things. You told me to come to you. Matthew 11:28, Jesus said, come to me if you're weary and burdened, and I'm going to give you rest. Well, I'm looking for that rest. You told me my peace I give you. And I know my Bible now. Finally, I love the Bible. Look at that, a Catholic who loves the Bible.
I love it.
But we're getting better. Elizabeth, I know you're an evangelical, but we're getting better as Catholics.
Come on. I'm like, Catholics, bring me your beautiful traditions.
We're getting it.
And I'll bring you my crazy charismatic stuff, and let's have a party.
I love it because that's what we need. We need to get excited about our faith. We need to get excited about the person of Jesus. But it's still an ongoing struggle because as a software guy, this is why I was somewhat good at software. I could anticipate potential problems. When we would write computer programs, we would picture, well, how is the user going to mess this up?
Right.
Think of everything that could go wrong, and we'll write the code accordingly. Yep. Well, that's a recipe for misery in life. If I think of everything that could possibly go wrong. Yeah. Right. So that's why I have to be careful. And I've had to learn a lot of psychology because I've gotten to work with a lot of psychologists and therapists. And I work on myself. I mean, I see the way I think. My wife has had tremendous struggles with anxiety very recently.
Wow.
And what we're learning is that, and this is so basic, it's not all that complicated. All of our fears begin with a thought.
Amen.
If I'm right.
Yep.
Right. So if I can control these thoughts, that's not denying reality. It's focusing on reality. We have a God who's all powerful, and these thoughts, they're not necessarily real. They're just thoughts, feelings. They're not facts.
That's right.
So learning that really it's a lot of things that have to come together. It's not complicated. It's not difficult, but it can be really hard to put into practice when you are bombarded with negativity and bad news, no matter where you go. It's like challenging.
Yeah, it's like the world doesn't want you to have that breakthrough, right? And yet, I think when my work is based in Scripture, and I found it so amazing that God shows clearly what mindset is, and it's a combination of spirit, soul, and body. And to me, it's like going to the owner's manual, right? And saying, well, how does my car run? And this is how it works. And he very clearly tells us, be careful what you think. Be careful what you say. He tells us very clearly the recipe for being able to walk in peace or walk in torment. And I don't know why we complicate it. I don't know what it is about humankind that we decide to make it complicated. But when you see the simplicity of it, and like you said, Gary, I couldn't agree more. I am like an absolute, that's my focus is right here. What thoughts are you entertaining?
Exactly.
Because we can take any result, any fruit in your life, and actually trace it all the way back to a thought. We can. Right. It's powerful. So when you started this work, did you immediately go into this subject matter? Because now you have these books, and I mean, it's so clear to me that you're called into that. What did you start to do in the beginning? You're like, I'm going to solve this for everybody, or was it later that you started to do that?
It was absolutely not my goal at all. I was going to be the next big thing in Catholic evangelization. I'm going to be talking about Jesus. I'm going to bring people to Jesus. But it never occurred to me that most of the people who really need to know Jesus are worriers. And it's so funny. I remember this day. I was walking the dog around the block, and I got this idea. I wanted to write a book. I didn't know what the book should be. I had gotten rejected on books that I had proposals for books. And I was walking around the block one day, and I got the idea, A Worrier's Guide to the Bible, which is my first book.
I love
And you know what, Elizabeth? It's based on when I was in college one time. And again, these are little pieces, little seeds that were planted. There was a campus ministry, and they were giving out these little green Gideon New Testaments. Yeah. And in the front of the book, in front of the Gideon New Testament, it had where to look when you're feeling anxious, where to look when you're feeling afraid, when you're scared of the future. And there would be Bible verses in there. And I kept that little Bible for years. And this book, this Warrior's Guide to the Bible, my first book, was essentially that. It's broken into different chapters. Where to look in the Bible when you're feeling worried about finances, when you're worried about health. Because you can't just hand somebody like the old Gary Zimak a Bible and say, here, you'll feel better. It's like, where do I start?
I know.
Right. So that's really my motivation. And it's become very clear to me, this is where God wants me.
Wow. And you preach to yourself too, don't you? Right.
I do. Because you know what? And me and the Lord have this conversation all the time. I say, Lord, I have enough material. You can stop. But he puts me through things. And again, my wife's recent bout with anxiety, it was horrible. I never saw anything like it. Would be up in the night, and she's so strong. She fought through it, and it took her to a new level of faith. She had a strong faith before, but she started realizing she wasn't trusting. And that's the problem. Jesus clearly says, don't worry about tomorrow. And what do we spend most of our time doing if we're worrying? Worrying about tomorrow.
So true. It's so true. And then you suffer a physical aspect of it. Like you said, you guys are up at night. People don't understand how closely connected that is. And I love brain research because, when you look into the chemicals that your brain creates from a thought, and then those chemicals get dumped into your body, right? I mean, isn't that fascinating how it's all just so connected?
Yeah, and makes sense. And I can feel it. I mean, I said, I had digestive problems. I had, you name it, I've had it. All attributed to my tendency to worry. Yeah. And now I was never diagnosed with clinical anxiety, but you end up in the hospital in the emergency room 5 times. I think I qualify for something.
Yeah.
So I talked to a therapist after the fact, and he said, yeah, you probably did have something, but fortunately you were able to work through it. But man, it's a lot of misery, a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of really scary times, and this hopelessness, this feeling of hopelessness. And I would just say to anybody who's watching, there's always hope. You might feel that it's hopeless, but it's not. It never is. No. But again, feelings aren't facts. I just love that because that's so true.
Feelings are not facts. And don't trust everything you tell yourself. Don't believe everything you tell yourself. But, it's interesting because I think some people are waiting for life circumstances to change for their anxiety to lift. And we can't be based on circumstances. So in the midst of you stepping out, I mean, I can imagine, you can share with us, what were the fears you had quitting your career? I mean, you got laid off, but you didn't have to quit. You could have gotten another job. You quit your career. You step into something unknown, uncharted. How is anxiety and fear not keeping you up every night with that?
Man, it was tough. I mean, that's the grace of God, nothing else, but it was not easy. And what's funny, my wife is the one, and she was the one who worried about money. Yeah. She said, why don't you give this a shot full time? I'm thinking, all right, I just got to get back, get another job in computer programming somehow. And it was not instant. I mean, I literally got kicked out of the boat, and I was trying to swim back to the boat. I mean, Peter walked on the water. He walked toward Jesus. I'm trying to get back in the boat because I was scared. And that doesn't go away. And I'm not going to say I didn't have some sleepless nights along the way. Right. I journaled a lot. I've journaled a lot over the years, and my prayer journal has been pretty raw. It's like, Lord, come on, I got bills to pay. And Elizabeth, I'll tell you right now, 8 years later, I'm barely making it, but God's providing for us, one month at a time. Yeah. There have been times when I looked at the bank book and I said, there's no way, this is just not going to work.
But it works out.
Somehow. Yeah.
Somehow. Isn't that strange how the math doesn't seem to make any sense?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
But there was, I had my moments, but it just brought me closer to him. Yeah. And my prayers were pretty honest, pretty open, pretty raw. Like, all right, you got to come through for me, big guy. You said you would provide. Jesus, you said my Father in heaven's going to provide for me like he does for the birds. Well, I can't pay these bills. And he has. We had to cut back tremendously, though. So my wife has been amazing. My kids have been great. But we feel called to do this. And I know my work is helping people, is helping many people.
That's what it's all about. If you can just help one person, I say that all the time. I think it's, interesting. Talk about prayer for a little bit, because this is, of course, a tool that we use to alleviate our fears and our anxiety. But prayers are not always answered the way that we think they should be. What has God shown you, and how have you matured in your prayer life? What can you share with us that you have learned?
Yeah, that's a great point because boy, he's smarter than I am. How about that?
Yeah.
That's what I realized, that there are so many times where and as we're new to prayer, and the Lord's patient with us. He just wants us to speak with him. But my initial prayers were, Lord, I got this problem, and here's how I think we should solve it. I give him a few choices, and
Yeah.
and then he comes up with something else. But I think I'm at the point now where I pray less for specific intentions. I mean, I still have intentions, but I'm praying now to become more like Jesus. That's my goal,
Mm,
that the Holy Spirit can transform me. But man, it's taken a long time to get to that point.
yeah.
It doesn't mean I don't pray for needs. I have material needs. I pray for my family. I pray for all the craziness in the world right now. But I'm also praying for spiritual things, which I never used to do that much.
Yeah, that's like
So
it's like a different kind of prayer, isn't it? It's a
yeah,
mature, maybe that's a
yeah.
maturity with your relationship. Well, the fact that you brought up current events, I think, what can you say to us about the fear that's out there right now? One of the reasons I'm doing this now is I have just been seeing, God has shown me basically stamped on everyone's forehead, fear, fear, fear. And it's not a judgment, it's just a reality of what we're faced with. So what do we do about all that? I mean, it's in the air, Gary. It's
It is. Oh my
palpable. You
gosh.
can feel it. What do
Yeah.
you do?
Well, the first thing I would say is admit that it's a real fear, right? A real threat. There's some crazy stuff going on right now, and I think Elizabeth, I was talking about this to my wife just today. I said honestly, with what's going on with the coronavirus now and the world being shut down. Okay, we are seeing something we have never seen before.
That's
I never
right.
thought this was possible.
Nope. Nope.
Right? So now that this happened, what is it? What else is possible? I mean, anything can happen. It's
Yeah.
all on the table now.
Yeah.
So I think God is. I can't say for sure where he's going with this, but I think he's trying to get our attention,
Mm,
and he's taken away a lot of things that we took for granted.
yeah.
Our focus can be on him, or should be on him. In my case, it is. Right now, he doesn't change. So no matter
Mm,
what goes on in the world, things are better. They're progressively getting better each day. But then you got other nuttiness happening now
yeah.
with rioting, and
Yeah. Yeah.
the division in our country is
Mm,
just so sad. I mean, it's
painful.
right.
Painful.
So God doesn't change.
Mm-mm.
Hebrews 13:8. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and
Mm,
forever.
mm,
And if you focus on him, and this is what I am learning, if you focus on him, your circumstances, the external circumstances, matter less and less.
yes. Yes.
That's a process though, right? I mean,
Yes.
but what did Paul say in his letter to the Philippians chapter 4, verse 4, I think it is, when he said, rejoice in the Lord always. Well, Paul's
Mm,
under house arrest. He's
mm,
chained to a Roman guard when he's saying that.
crazy. Yeah.
So, the focus, if it's on God, if it's on his relationship with you, if you're focused on the fact that he's still in control, you're going to be more peaceful.
That's the part I was going to say to you that really, when it all boils down, sometimes I just have to say, God, you're in control. And,
Yeah.
the world says, and we say it too, what you focus on expands. It's funny how that's said sort of in the world, but it's really what God said, didn't he? And he said, focus here. It's interesting at how that works. When you're nervous, when you're anxious, if you take your eyes off yourself, your circumstances, and you focus them on something bigger, in this case on him,
Mm-hmm.
suddenly things melt away. It's not that anything's changed, but your focus has changed, and it's powerful. And the world without God uses that technique, by the way. You see them talk about it, but it's devoid of him. You add him into it, it's amazing, right?
Right, right. And let's face it, God gives us limited control. We think we're
Yes.
in charge, like, oh,
No.
I'm in charge. I
No.
got money in the bank. Everything's good. We're
No.
not in control, but he gives us the control enough to turn to him. That's one thing I
Yes.
can do. I can turn to him, turn off the TV, turn off the radio, get
Yeah.
away from the internet, stop scrolling my Facebook feed. I can make that decision, because the more time I focus on that stuff,
Yeah.
the more depressed I'm going to get,
Yeah.
because there's not a lot of good going on there.
No.
So you got to limit your exposure. I'm not saying bury your head in the sand.
Right.
I'm saying really choose how to focus your time.
Yeah.
And really, I choose to focus on the reality that God's in control and that he's all powerful.
Yeah.
I might
Thank
not
God.
get it. I
Yeah.
didn't create the world either. Like he told
Yeah.
Job, hey, Job, where were you when I created the world? Right?
That's so humbling.
Isn't that
That's a
great?
good, when you think you got it all figured
Yeah.
out, that's so humbling to read that and just kind of say, all right, I got to chill out here. And, I mean, thank God he's in control, because I would mess it up. You would mess it up.
Oh yeah.
And I don't want that fear and anxiety from being in control. I really don't. And
Right.
he's so sweet about that, because, he reminds us gently, that sometimes not gently, that I got this,
Yeah.
he's a good
Yeah.
father. Like
Yeah.
any good father, he provides, he wants you to do well, but he's not going to just give you anything if you're not ready
No.
for it. I mean, he
No.
makes wise choices because he is wisdom and he is love. And we have to trust that.
And ultimately, it really boils down to, if you want to be peaceful in life, you got to accept. I believe you have to accept two things. Number one, God is all powerful, and that He loves you. If you can accept those two things, then anything that happens is somehow an expression of His love. If He allows it to happen, He might not will it.
Yeah.
He certainly doesn't will evil, but He allows us to go into the
Mm.
storm sometimes,
Yeah.
so that He can draw us closer to Him. I don't
So
like it.
true.
I don't like
No.
the way He operates. I wish we could
No.
do this an easier way,
Agreed.
right?
Agreed. I feel the same way, but it is what it is. It's a broken world. And
Yeah.
we do have to go through those things. But, when we've talked about your life, everything you've been through, set you up so you could help other people. And, to everyone who's listening now, I want you just to say to, the person listening who hasn't found their path, the person listening who is up all night in anxiety and fear, who can't seem to overcome it. They may or may not have a relationship with God, but they just feel stymied and stuck and feel like there's no hope. It's that hopelessness. What would you say to that person today?
I would say, give God a chance. He loves you. He loves you. He wants to have a personal friendship, a relationship with you. He created you to be in that relationship. He didn't have to create you. And, I'm an evangelist. That's what I do. I talk about God because He's changed my life. And through
Yeah.
Christ, once I surrendered my life to Him, I finally have gotten the peace that I've looked for so many years. So it's simple. Just accept Jesus Christ. I don't sound like a Catholic. I sound more evangelical saying this, but
Yeah.
accept that you need a Savior. You're a sinner, and to turn your life over to Jesus. Accept Him as your personal Lord and Savior. Surrender your life to Him, and say, all right, Lord, where do we go next? Right?
That's awesome. And Gary, I'm listening to you talk and I'm just thinking how God must have had so much fun creating you, because you're so unique. You're so unique. And you found your path. And I haven't come across many people quite positioned as you are. I want you to share with everybody what you're doing. I know speaking right now in person is off the table, but you're definitely someone who's gone to a ton of conferences. But talk about all the things you do, your books, where people can find you, because I know there's so much more value that you provide. So some people are going to want to interact with you. Talk to about that.
Thank you, Elizabeth. My website is followingthetruth.com, because it's dedicated to following Jesus Christ, the way, the truth, and the life. Followingthetruth.com. I started doing a daily email devotional, which is it's called Let Not Your Heart Be Troubled, free of charge. I send it out every day. It's a Bible verse, a reflection, and just a way to give hope to the hopeless. So you can sign up at the website. I do a daily podcast called Following the Truth. And again, it's relevant, it's practical. It's how God can get involved in your life and help you. I'm working on multiple books. I have contracts for 7 more books that are coming out.
Wow.
I have 7 published already. So as long as the
Wow.
Lord keeps me around, I'm in this for the long haul.
Yeah, no kidding. That is amazing. So those books are all listed on your
Yep,
website, and they are amazing. The subject matter is so great for anybody that deals with anxiety and fear. And you know what? We need to we have to watch our eye gate and our ear gate. We need to listen to and watch things that will build us up. So a daily email from you, a daily podcast, this is what people need to build them up. Careful what you listen to. And Gary, I definitely think God is speaking through you. I just want to say to you, thank you for honoring me and my community with your time, with your treasures, with your gifts. And I'm going to be excited to see what you do next. I think you're doing incredible things for God and for people.
Thank you for saying that. I think you are too. This was fun.
Yeah,
You made it easy.
It's
Thanks,
easy.
Elizabeth.
It's easy when you're yourself, Gary. It's easy. You're awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. God bless you.
God bless.